So for 2020, Polaris once again shook the industry up with the release of the XP 1000S models in both the Sportsman and the Scrambler platform. Nailed it. As ATV enthusiasts, this is pretty exciting news for us. We think with how wide and technical today's trails have become, with side-by-sides tearing them up, we definitely think there's room in the market for a 55-inch wide four-wheeler. But now that it's been a couple weeks and the excitement of having a new ATV model released has worn off a little bit, we want to take a critical look at the XP 1000S models and see if they're really worth the additional cost over the base models.
55 inches wide, 14.5 inches underneath, more than a ton of capability or strength to go harder.
First off, let's take a look at some of the upside of the new machines. Starting with one of my favorite upgrades, which is the new steering design. One of the problems they have with the older machines is the bracket that connects to the tie rods comes loose off the splines.
Sportsman 1K, probably the same as the 850. You look at all that play in the steering, not doing anything to the tire. Some free play in there because the splines are stripped.
It's a fairly easy fix that you can do in your garage. For the premium price you pay for both the base model and the upgraded S models, a steering redesign was definitely needed. The EPS on the new machines has improved according to Polaris. EPS is now speed sensitive, which was definitely a criticism I had of the EPS on the 2018 Sportsman XP 1000. The steering is a little bit sensitive, especially at higher speeds. Down in the low range, it's absolutely perfect, and I expect that that's probably the case with the XP 1000S models. EPS is now dampened on the 1000S models, and I think that's a great move by Polaris. The new design is an idler arm and drag link that pulls the tie rod ends off the bracket, moving them out further. Polaris claims this eliminates bump steer, but I'd personally be happy with the new design if it simply fixes the aforementioned steering issue. Next up in the win column is the new front diffs. The Sportsman XP 1000S has the Ranger XP 1000 front diff, and the Scrambler got the Razor XP 1000 front diff. The front diff upgrade is a huge win for Polaris. As most of you know, some of the more recent models had an issue with a weak pinion plate. That seems to have been resolved in the 18 and 19 models, but a whole new front diff, definitely an awesome upgrade. And an upgraded transmission? Sure, why not? More beef is better beef. I don't know that the Sportsman XP 1000 had any issue with the transmission. I have not had any issue with mine, but an upgrade is always better.
Dude, I've done a ton of research, and I don't know if I've ever heard of a freaking transmission issue.
The rear end on the XP 1000S models, definitely a win too, if not for anything but aesthetics. You can see the exhaust comes out on this side, and they basically replaced the exhaust location with the CVT exhaust. So now the CVT exhaust comes out basically where the exhaust is on the base models. I don't necessarily think that's good yet. I don't think Polaris has figured out a great design for the CVT exhaust. I was worried about mine, which comes out kind of in the middle under here, which would be exactly where the exhaust on the new rear ends come out. But I think the new CVT exhaust is in an even worse position, even though aesthetically the back end is definitely significantly improved. So here's where I'm neutral on the S models, at least until I get some seat time on one. First off, the 55-inch width. Obviously 55 inches is going to present some hauling and trail restriction issues, and possibly even some registration issues if you live in one of those big government states. The ground clearance is potentially a huge advantage, but as any ATV enthusiast knows, ground clearance isn't everything. Part of the allure of having an ATV versus a side-by-side is choosing your lines on technical trails. Winding your way through obstacles and straddling ruts is part of the fun on an ATV. It's kind of a crapshoot whether the 55 inches is going to actually add capability on some of those trails. Now, will it add stability? Sure, but that seems like a crutch that no one was asking for. The next thing I'm not overly concerned with at this point is the weight. According to the Polaris website, the dry weight on the Sportsman XP 1000S is 881 pounds. I believe that's a typo. I think that's the dry weight for the scrambler. Some of the initially released videos from the demo ride had the Sportsman at 970 pounds dry. That's a total of almost 170 pounds over the dry weight of the original XP 1000. I saw in some of the comments that the weight was going to be an issue for some of you guys, mentioning things like, wait till you flip that 1,000-pound ATV over on yourself. Well, I can say from experience, flipping an 800-pound ATV over on yourself isn't exactly a bright idea either. I don't think the 952cc ProStar engine is going to have any issue pushing the additional weight. So as far as power to weight goes, I'm definitely not overly concerned with the added beef on the new models. That brings me to my next neutral point, power. I also saw in some of the comments where some of you guys were hoping that the ATV world would break 100 horsepower in a stock ATV. Having 18 months on the XP 1000 now, I can honestly say that horsepower has tipped the scale on what's actually usable, especially for trail riding. I've never felt like I wanted more on this ATV, whereas every other ATV I've owned, I've always felt like the threshold could be a little bit higher. I think the 952cc ProStar that powers the XP 1000 is going to have absolutely no problem with the S models. And I do realize that that's down a horsepower because of the new exhaust setup, but unless you're overly obsessed with numbers on a spec sheet, I don't think you're going to notice it at all. Now we'll get into what I don't like about the S models. And bear with me on this. Some of this, as a Sportsman owner, is going to be a little bit of a gripe session. First off, the updates that I mentioned were much needed improvements on the base Sportsman. But as a rider who's perfectly happy with the chassis, power, design, and capability of the base model, I would have really liked to see those updates come to the base XP 1000. The steering, the EPS, and the front diff upgrades would have been huge improvements on this model Sportsman. As of right now, there's no premium edition XP 1000 aside from the Hunter edition listed on the Polaris website. If the premium edition is gone in favor of the S model, I think that's a huge loss in that category of the market. The premium edition had the brush guards, the winch, and the upgraded tires. You're going to have to do that yourself if you want the narrower version with some of those more premium options. I know those aren't necessarily gripes about the S model itself, but I'd really like to see those updates while maintaining the same price point on the base model XP 1000. To possibly even include the Walker Evans shocks and maybe even a skid plate so that Polaris makes a version a little bit more comparable with the XDP and the XXC models from Can-Am. ATV On Demand also made an excellent point about the price point starting to move beyond the capability of the blue-collar consumers that started to drive the industry in the first place. I couldn't agree more with that statement, but 15 grand seems like the threshold on ultra-premium ATVs. I think for most of us, caught in the middle of spending a little bit too much money on ultra-premium toys are really wanting is a little bit more reliability and durability on the biggest and the baddest machines out there. I truly believe a lot of the issues that the XP 1000 had have been addressed and corrected on the S models, making that a much more dependable and rugged machine. And for me personally, as of right now, that ruggedness and dependability is the greatest benefit you get in upgrading. If I were to trade this machine in on the S, it'd be for those beefed up components more so than the 55 inches and the increased ground clearance. And I think that's kind of the point ATV On Demand was trying to make. For most of us, buying one of these machines is kind of a big financial decision. I wish Polaris had invested the time and resources into beefing up the base model versus pushing us towards the S models. With all griping aside, truth be told, I'm extremely happy to see Polaris moving the industry forward once again. That's exactly why I chose to support Polaris and abandon Japanese reliability in the first place, even if it does come with the occasional headache. And to Polaris' only real competition in the market, I don't think that Can-Am is going to have an answer to the 55-inch wide machine this year or next year for that matter. But with Polaris dropping the XP 1000 premium version and the XP 1000 Scrambler from the lineup, it definitely opened up a gap in their lineup that Can-Am will be more than willing to fill with the Renegade and the Outlander XTP and XXC models. But the S models are definitely going to find their niche in the industry. I can't wait to see some of what our southern brethren do on modifications to trick out some of those 55-inch wide machines. You know those builds are going to be cool. I'm also excited to see what some actual seat time feels like. There's a part of me that feels like I could be completely blown away by the S model of the Sportsman and the Scrambler. Enough so to deal with the headache of trying to throw it in the back of your truck. And even enough to deal with the increased price point. Time will tell what actual riders think about these things and the riding conditions that they see most. But for now, I'm still reeling in the fact that someone has finally paid attention to the ATV market.
I don't have that much experience riding quad bikes.
What are you doing here? What are you doing here? What are you doing here?
That rear end,
Yeah.
Do the meat thing.
hacking on top of your legs.
With how wide and technical today's new trail, having a new ATV model. Any
See, now you're laughing.
I don't know what's funny.